So Alan, let me go ahead and jump to your question because I think you're asking a great question. So again, guys, if you're joining us late, feel free to introduce yourself. Feel free to ask a question. It's an inclusive chat, so don't be embarrassed if you're asking something basic or whatever. So Alan asks, barely scraping the surface of data science, but I've been programming for years. I don't fully understand in which instances you would use R versus Python. Okay, great. That's a great question, Alan, and I think that's a common question. Maybe people don't always express it out, but I think you're asking a great question. So there's a lot of ways to answer this, and I'm just going to give you my view, and feel free to research it on your own. But to me, a big part of the answer for your question is thinking about the history of these packages, right? Particularly with R, because R is deeply rooted in the research and academia worlds, right? We have academic institutions all over the world, and we have research labs all over the world, think tanks, things like that, right? So the intention for R was to always just kind of be a research tool where you're working on some interesting stuff, in a lab or in a university somewhere, but you need some sort of mathematical model or some probabilities or some statistics. And you have this one single package of R that you can use, model something out, and get an answer, right? The challenge with that is that a lot of those instances were really kind of like I'm going to say like one-time use types of scenarios, right? Like you're a researcher at a university, or a professor at a university, you want to publish a white paper, you have some ideas, you use R to do the code for those ideas, you get a model, you get an answer, you write your paper, you put away the model, and it's never seen again, right? Like that code is just like never touched again. I mean, that for a lot of people for a long time, because remember, R is pretty old, right? R has been around for a while. For most people for a long time, that was basically how you used R. It was almost like a one-time thing, and also by individuals, right? It was, or very, very small teams, like 2-3 person teams. Like it was just maybe you and your graduate assistants that touched the code, no one else. And once the paper was out there, once your research was out there, you were done. You closed up that file, you zipped it, and you put it in your archives, never to be seen again, right? So that was R for a very long time, and it still is R, right? A lot of places still use R in the way I just described. So R was never really designed to be an enterprise level language. That just wasn't like where it was rooted, right? And by enterprise level, I'm talking about models that you would develop, that you would deploy, that you maintain different versions of, that you retrain at some point in the future, that you distribute to a lot of different people, like hundreds and thousands of users worldwide. R was just never really designed for that, right? It was intended for an academic researcher, right? And it was also kind of intended that way because R was like never really intended to even leave the package, right? Because the nice thing about R is that R is kind of like this all-in-one like piece of software where you can do a lot of modeling. On the other hand, you have, Alan, no, don't jump ahead on me, Alan. We'll get to that. You're asking a good follow-up, but don't get all crazy on me, Alan. Let's pump the brakes here. On the other hand, you have Python, right? And Python is much more of a traditional language where, it's an interpreter that you can write different scripts for, different programs for. You can use a sequential approach to it, or you can do object-oriented programming. You can create APIs with it. You can create websites with it. You can create all these things that really aren't possible in R, right? Like one of the large failings of R is that there's really no good interface tools for it, right? I know. The R purists will tell me that that's not true. That there are interface packages for R. There are, but they're not easy to use. Right? They're not easy to use. They don't always use their traditional tools like HTML and JavaScript that would then allow you to integrate it to other libraries, other really modern GUI tools that are out there, right? It doesn't always talk well with the backends, right? Your backend kind of has to be R data, and that's not always a good idea, right? You might want to do like a Hadoop backend or something, right? So that's kind of like where R fails, right? The joke I tell people is that everybody is a fan of R until you have to use it in an enterprise level deployment, right? Like when all of a sudden you're coming into a big company and the company tells you, yeah, that model's great, and now we need it to, feed these 5,000 users globally, and then I need you to do it under version control, and it needs to have a really great interface, and I also need it to run pretty fast. R is terrible at all of those things, right? So that's why Python has really become so popular at the enterprise level, because you can do all of those things in Python, right? You can distribute it across different servers. You can't always do that with R, at least not in a convenient and safe way, right? You can make a lot of mistakes deploying R, right? So this is why R has kind of been surpassed by Python. But at the same time, R will always have a place in academia and research labs, right? And that's kind of why I get the question too, and I know it because I did my graduate studies in R too, so I know a lot of you are the same way. Somebody just yesterday commented that on one of my posts, and I said, yeah, that's exactly what I did. You study R in school and then you switch over to Python. That's a very common path, right? So Alan, that's kind of the answer, right? That you can start with R, and R has a rich history, and it will still be around, but it just doesn't have those deployment capabilities. And really, what you're talking about there is you're talking about the flexibility of the language, right? Python is an extremely flexible language. You can do a ton of things with it. You can't say the same thing for R. Okay, so I hope that helps you, Alan.